Here, question period Canada, pretty excited, Freaky Friday. What is going on, WTF? We're just gonna get it going. It's pretty fun. We have a very mixed bag of tricks. We're gonna start out with Pierre Trudeau. What? Yep, we're starting out with Pierre Trudeau. Let's jump right in. Hello, Bud Wilson. How are you today, sir? Howdy, Sheila. How are you today? What's going on? Kenny Crow. Good to see you. Good day, Kirk. What is up? Hello, Clint. How is everybody doing? Gang, it's Brent Person's birthday. Everybody wish Brent a happy birthday. Happy birthday, Brent, brother. Brent's one of my favorites on this channel. Absolutely. Happy birthday, Brent. Sorry to interrupt. But I had some inside information there I wanted to share with the gang.
Hey there.
In Western Canada, the middle finger.
Okay, first question, what's my favorite spot in Canada? Salmon Arm, BC. My father had an approach to politics that not everyone agreed with. And no matter how nice and good and smart any politician is, there's always going to be people who disagree with some of the decisions. Because really, in politics, you do have to make big decisions, and whenever you make big decisions, there's going to be people who agree with it and people who don't disagree with it. And some of the decisions my father made, there are a number of people who disagreed with quite intensely, and they didn't always get along the best way. But he always thought about what was right for Canada and worked very, very hard to try and build a better country for everyone within it. That didn't work for everyone, and not everyone was happy with that, but he made a mark on this country that shapes us to this day, and it's because of him that this school has a big, successful immersion program. I mean, these are things that made a big difference right across the country, and we should be very proud of that. Similarly, I'm going to make decisions, and I have made decisions that some people like and some people don't like. And ultimately, what you have to be confident about is you have to know in your heart and in your brain that the decisions you're making are the right ones, that you've listened to the people who want you to do this, you've listened to the people who don't want you to do this, and you've made a decision in what is the best interest for Canadians now and in the future, and that's what I stay focused on.
So the videos end quickly, some of them do. We have so much more to show you today, and it's all over the place. So I think this is the next really interesting piece. Just getting it kicked off. Again, I think it's interesting.
Hi, everyone.
We'll see. You guys tell me if it's
Carl
interesting
DeVille.
or not.
This is my friend Robert Dorion. We're here to speak on behalf of all Canadians that have issues with this carbon tax. Canadians rose on April 1st as a result of the implementation of the carbon tax. The protests are ongoing throughout this country as we speak right now. As a concerned Canadian, I am seeing in the protests is very concerning and for many reasons. Firstly, I would like to implore that all parties, protesters, law enforcement, and Canadians who may feel inconvenienced by this protest, to exercise the utmost patience and understanding. I would also ask that everyone engage in a respectful dialogue to address any issues that might arise during this protest, while ensuring that they are safe, lawful, and peaceful, and that they respect all aspects of Canadians' rights to protest. If everyone involved in any aspect could be counted upon open, honest, and respectful dialogue. This would beget the trust amongst all to have a successful protest. Within the parameters of protesters' rights to protest and law enforcement mandates, thus keeping protests safe, peaceful, and lawful. Calm heads must prevail for everyone involved. Secondly, there is no set ground rules for protesters across this country to have a safe, peaceful, and lawful protest. Protesters are getting confused by what appears to be continually changing rules from law enforcement in some locations. I have witnessed videos where protesters and law enforcement officers are in discussion and trying to work it out. However, I think that we all agree on how frustrations can arise when the rules of engagements are unclear. This is not what is needed, nor is it beneficial. Changing the rules or threatening of arrest does not work in anyone's favor. Given this, we also petition the federal courts to immediate action on establishing a consistent ground rules for safe, peaceful, and lawful protests, while balancing the goals of all parties involved. As a concerned Canadian citizen, we ensure that success for all protesters have the democratic right to a safe and legal and peaceful manner. Law enforcement has the mandate to ensure that this is also the case. However, the rule of what is and what is not legal should not change during the course of a protest. Misunderstanding, miscommunication, and misinterpretation of laws and rights can lead to infringements on right or wrong from either law enforcement and or protesters' perspective. Some communication rule changes can be interpreted as an intimidation. A desired goal of our presentation today highlights these issues and proactive activities to take place rather than reactive, potentially knee-jerk reaction that could result in possible charges. Tying up precious court time and immeasurable resources on so many fronts. Having rules of engagement established by the federal court on a priority basis for a safe, peaceful, and lawful protests for Canadians to advocate for themselves will significantly accomplish accomplishments for the democracy of this wonderful country of ours. Lastly, we want to encourage the government to an open up dialogue with the citizens of this country, of Canada, and the businesses of Canada to address the issues of the carbon tax implementation on Canadian citizens and their businesses across this beautiful country. We cannot tax the middle class into poverty. This tax will be the straw that breaks the Canadians' back. In a true democratic society, people have the right to vote on what matters that impact every aspect of their lives and their livelihood. Is it time for a referendum? Our elected official profess democracy. What can be more democratic than a referendum on this issue? Give Canadians a voice. Let them decide for themselves. If the federal government fails to vote on a referendum, should the provinces conduct their own referendum and poll their people on their desire to opt in or out of the carbon tax? Canadians deserve a voice on this issue. It's time to let Canadians decide. Thank you. en français en ce moment. Merci pour votre présence aujourd'hui. Je m'appelle Carl Douville et c'est mon ami à côté de moi, c'est Robert Dorion. Nous ferons notre présentation conjointe en anglais et en français. En date de le 1er avril, le gouvernement nous j'ai de à ce point des activités incompatibles d'ouvrir vite aux Canadiens et les Canadiens d'ici.
Avant de toutes vous, écoutez le peuple. Sur la défense de la démocratie, il y a plusieurs justices. On était capable de le faire avant. Because the goods that we're buying and purchasing in Quebec and any other province are all going to be affected by this hike, tax hike. We've already seen the impact on the price of food, the price of heating, and all kinds of other items that we need to survive. This is a very bad move. That is why, in my opinion, we see so many people protesting right now. They're doing it in a very legal and respectful way. They're not blocking roads. They're not causing any trouble. We are really good Canadians trying to get a message across. And that is the right thing to do in a democracy. Justin Trudeau is always proud to stand up on a podium and say how he is a great defender of democracy across the world. Ready to spend hundreds of millions of dollars in Ukraine and other countries to secure democracy. Why won't he apply those same rules in our country? When 386,000 Canadians signed the largest petition ever in Canada, asking him to resign or to call elections, he brushed it off. In my opinion, that's not democracy. Did not even address the question. I think that we are at a crossroad right now. Canadians are standing up. We're doing it in a peaceful manner. We are using the tools at our disposition, like we're doing right now, expressing ourselves, expressing our concerns, going out of our way to do press conferences, which we never do. Anybody looking at this, watching this, should realize that this is not normal. This whole scenario is not normal. You don't see regular Canadians standing up, doing a press conference, trying to get the government to listen. And there's a reason for that. We have hit a low point. We can't take it anymore. And I'm talking for a lot of Canadians. I can't speak for all of them, but a lot of them. This needs to be addressed. Our Prime Minister, who is so keen on democracy, should do the basic thing in a democracy and listen to his people. So on that, I'd like to thank you very much for your time. I hope this message will get across. Keep your heads up and be proud. Thank you.
The questions? No questions here? We'll not take questions from Zoom.
Okay, 1 second. Mr. Lee, one question, one follow-up.
Hi, this is Shaoli Lee from City News. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, I can. Thank you very much.
Just first point of clarification, Monsieur Dorion, could I actually just ask you to spell your name, please? We're going to put
Yeah, my name is
you on
Robert,
news.
R-O-B-E-R-T. Last name is D-O-R-I-O-N.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. And earlier you talked about, or rather your colleague talked about good open dialogue, a referendum. What would you like to see going forward? What would be a good first step from the federal government in terms of indicating that they're actually listening to you on this?
I believe that there are two options that were presented. One is an election, because an election, in my opinion, in our opinion, is a democratic way to have a positive or a concrete answer to the question of that carbon tax. Mr. Trudeau says that and is confident that the Canadians stand by his carbon tax. What better way than an election in a democracy to get a concrete answer to this? Because what we're seeing is opposite of that. If he's not willing to have an election for whatever reason, then what my colleague Carl suggested was a referendum. And that is also a democratic avenue to get a clear response from the Canadian citizens as to whether or not they want this tax. So I think at this point, seeing the impact that it has on the quality of life of Canadians, I think this is a very reasonable suggestion.
Thank you for that. And as a follow-up, could I just get some, a bit more depth on this? Because is the opposition specific to the idea of pricing carbon? Like, is there a proposal that you feel like would be acceptable that would penalize large corporate polluters, for example, so long as it doesn't impact prices or affordability for ordinary Canadians?
Carlson. As an industrialist, as a millwright, I would say it's pretty simple. It's make your environmental policies like we were more stringent, and work with the industries into working into a more clean environment policy to actually do this. You do not need to tax everybody or tax basically products to the point that everything gets expensive, then anybody can't afford it. As another point that I would see that would happen as well as with this carbon tax is it's going to make all our exports way more expensive, which was going to take us away from take our leading edge in the entire world for exports, because all our products will be more expensive to export to other countries due to the fact that the carbon tax is going to implemented, and nowhere else in the world is the carbon tax implemented. So the companies will move down south most likely because there's no carbon tax, and we'll lose jobs as well as in that manner as well. So I honestly think environmental policies is probably the way to go. It was worked before. We are the most environmentally clean country in this world, one of the most, and there's no doubt about it. We are carbon positive. We are actually very, 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 very well off, and we are very, very environmentally aware of our industries. So I honestly think that there's a lot easier ways to fix the issue than tax the people and tax the product that this country is making, to the point that exports are going to lose. Probably lose part of the GDP, the 33% or 34% of the GDP export that's leaving this country. I don't know how much it's going to affect it, how deep it's going to go, but if I was a businessman, I'd go where there's no carbon tax. I'd move my company out down south. That's the honest truth. Common sense.
One more question? This concludes the press conference. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your time. Thank you.
Hey folks, what's up? Ehren here, Question Period Canada. I'm a voter just like you. Well, maybe not just like you, but similar. I'm interested in Canadian politics all of a sudden because of how tough financially times have become recently. What is going on? How did we get here? Since 2019, it's been downhill. So I started this YouTube channel about Canadian politics, federal politics, things that happen in the Senate and in Parliament. It's important. A crucial part of identifying any situation is getting to know the power players. I know they're all politicians, so they're all clowns. Doesn't matter to me which caucus you're loyal to. I'm interested in your character, and we're going to be learning about the politicians and their characters right here in this segment. You can decide for yourself whether it's a clown or a power player. Let's meet one now. This is Melissa Lantsman. She's an MP representing Thornhill, Ontario. She is a firecracker in Poilievre's toolbox. Indeed, you'll see that. As a voter, I like the way that she drives her questions. Something you might not know about Melissa is that she's the first Conservative member that was elected to Parliament that is openly gay and Jewish. Good for her.
Honourable member for Thornhill.
It's Friday and the Prime Minister is still not worth the cost. We know that this summer Canada's economy actually shrank while the American economy grew by nearly 5%. All because of higher government spending, which leads to higher interest rates and higher inflation. Canadians are getting poorer, and no amount of rattling off statistics is going to change that fact. When will this government finally commit to balancing the budget and axing the tax so that Canadians can afford to eat, heat, and house themselves?
That's a tame version of Melissa Lantsman. Let's see her when she's getting fired up asking a question.
The honourable member from Thornhill.
It certainly doesn't help the people in Newmarket, in Aurora, in Richmond Hill, in Woodbridge, in Markham, in Stouffville, or in North York. All of these communities got sold out by their Liberal MPs, and they can't even tell people why. They had a choice to stand with their communities, and instead they stood with the Prime Minister, and now they're hiding and hoping that everybody forgets. If these MPs won't listen to their constituents, won't advocate for them in the House of Commons, and won't even stand to defend their vote, then what are they even doing here?
Something else you might not know about Melissa Lantsman is that she is the deputy leader of the Conservative Party. Her and Tim Uppal were named by Poilievre after he was elected to the Conservative Party leadership in 2021 to be deputy leaders. Let's see another reason that Poilievre would put her in such a powerful position. Here's another Melissa Lantsman question.
Thornhill.
Mr. Speaker, he should take some lessons from this
everybody.
side. The story changes every single time he is asked. He should admit that Canadians got robbed blind with this deal. The Prime Minister even told his backbench to keep this all a secret and talk out the clock so they don't have to release documents. There's no reason to do that unless they're hiding something. So we want to know what's in this deal, why he spent $15 billion to ship Canadian jobs overseas and pretend that after 8 years they care about labor in this country. Why so secret? What are they hiding?
Seems to me, as a voter, that Melissa Lantsman's stock is on the rise. She lights up the House of Commons on a regular basis. People pay attention when she speaks. That wraps up our introduction to Melissa Lantsman, everybody. As voters, we need to get to know the members of Parliament, right? So that's what we'll be doing here, bringing you the members of Parliament. Brief introductions. I'm Ehren, Question Period Canada, having fun with Canadian politics all the time. Like and subscribe. We'll catch you next video. Thank you so much for watching. Ciao. So that's Melissa Lantsman, and then today she had a big speech. Like, this is from today, and we have that. So we're jumping right back
Housing
into more
prices have
Melissa
doubled.
Lantsman.
The cost of rent
Fun.
has doubled. The cost of a mortgage payment has doubled in this country. It used to take 25 years to pay off a mortgage, and now it takes 25 years in the city to save for a down payment. And in a frantic slew of announcements over the last week, Justin Trudeau is doubling down on rebranded, recycled policies that simply are not getting houses built. We saw also from the CMHC, the Prime Minister's own housing authority, say that housing starts will be lower this year than they were last year, then they will be lower in 2026 than they were in 2021, and that affordability will be out of reach and that rents will continue to go up. We have a crisis in this country, and a bunch of recycled, rebranded announcements aren't going to fix the problem that Justin Trudeau created. Housing prices have doubled, and we see more of the same. Expensive photo ops from the Prime Minister, and a slew of announcements that are exactly the same that got us into this mess. I'm happy to take a question from others.
Global News. Do the Conservatives agree that more diverse housing solutions like fourplexes or building central density in residential neighborhoods is a solution to this housing crisis?
Look, Conservatives have a plan that we are going to tie federal funding to municipalities, increasing their approvals by 15%. Those who do it will get a bonus, a building bonus. Those who do not will get fined. And however they do, whatever housing units that they put forward, we just want to see houses built. And we've got a plan to actually build in terms of results, in terms of actual places that people can live in. So we're fine with municipalities and provinces making decisions about the kinds of housing for their own communities. We just want to see more approvals and less gatekeepers in the way.
Hi, Noah Jarvis from North. The Jewish community in Canada for years have been calling for the moving of Canada's embassy in Israel to Jerusalem. I believe that you've been unequivocal about that in the past. So under a Conservative government, under a Pierre Poilievre government, would you guys commit to moving Canada's embassy in Israel to Jerusalem?
Look, I would say that the Jewish community today has a big problem in this country with anti-Semitism, with violence in their streets, with violence in the neighborhoods. Our country has a long-standing position when it comes to our relationship with our friend and ally. And we want to see that violence, certainly in the region, stop. We want to see the hostages returned. We want to make sure that the priority is Canadians to feel safe in their own neighborhoods, and we will continue advocating the position of moral clarity that we have always had on this. I think the Prime Minister is the one who has a different position every day and who is making this community feel unsafe, and he is making our streets more dangerous than they were.
Would the Conservative Party welcome Anthony Hausfeather? Has anybody spoken to him?
Well, look, I think that that decision lies with Anthony Hausfeather in terms of what he wants to do. But I think he's been very clear that he doesn't feel like there is a place for him in his party. We saw the motion. We saw the motion debated in the House. That he had voted against, that he wasn't even told about, that has inflamed the situation in this country, handing a victory to Hamas, not calling for the release of hostages. I think that's a decision for Anthony Hausfeather, and certainly I think he would find a more welcoming position of the long-standing Conservative position on this issue and many others that he seems to be voting against his Prime Minister.
And the safety of aid workers in exchange for American support. What is your position on that? Can Canada make the same demands?
Look, Canada has a long-standing position that I think has been thrown out the window by this government, and depending on what day you ask the government what their position is, it changes. Our position is clear, that we want to see the violence stop, that we want to see Hamas surrender, drop their weapons, and return the hostages, that we want to see a negotiated two-state solution that is negotiated by the two parties. That was always the consensus position in Canada. That is not the consensus position of Justin Trudeau and his government, who are inflaming the situations by bringing motions to the House of Commons. We will continue to have our long-standing Canadian position, one that is very clear and one that Justin Trudeau simply can't make a decision on.
I was curious about getting your stance on gatekeeping and stopping gatekeeping for developing housing. I was curious about your thoughts around Doug Ford's stance to not allow floor prices in single-family residential areas. Is that gatekeeping in your view?
Well, look, we've seen the price of a home double. We've seen the price of rents double. We've seen the price of a mortgage payment double, and we need solutions that are actually going to get housing built. The Housing Accelerator Fund that the government has put forward hasn't built a single home. They've said so themselves. The CMHC says affordability is getting worse and not better. We want to see housing actually being built, so that's why Conservatives have put forward a plan that is going to encourage and frankly reward municipalities that get at least 15% more housing built and penalize the ones that don't. How they do it is simply up to them. We want those gatekeepers out of the way, and we want houses built so the Canadians can have homes that they can afford. Oh, we're just going to do one question. We're going to do one question per outlet. Anyone else? Thanks very much, guys.
Bonjour tout le monde. Hi everybody. Good to see you. Mélanie Joly.
So our next piece is Melanie Joly, Minister of Foreign Affairs. And I know people won't like watching this, but we have to watch. Like, it's part of it. We don't just watch the Conservatives. So let's see what this trophy has to say. She's kind of
Foreign
bad.
Minister from
not,
Canada.
Not one of my favorites.
Mélanie Joly, la ministre des Affaires étrangères du Canada. Ça me fait plaisir de vous voir aujourd'hui. It's a pleasure to be back here at NATO, celebrating 75 years of the alliance. Canada, as a founding member, is extremely proud of this year. And also, we're an Arctic nation, and therefore we're extremely happy to see Sweden now being part of NATO. Alors, ça nous fait plaisir d'être ici et de célébrer nos 75 ans en tant qu'alliance. Et nous sommes également très contents de voir que la Suède se joint à l'OTAN. Now, talking about Ukraine, Putin thought that he would divide us. Now we're stronger than ever. We know we have to continue to be united supporting Ukraine. Canada has been supportive of Ukraine since day one. We know also we have to continue to invest in supporting militarily and at all levels Ukraine. That is why we signed recently a long-term security agreement with Ukraine. Tomorrow we'll be also talking about the Indo-Pacific. Lots of our Indo-Pacific friends and partners will be here. Canada, as a Pacific nation, will continue to commit a lot of our resources to the Indo-Pacific. Right now, after the US, we are the NATO partners that have the most frigates in the region. We need to invest in the Indo-Pacific to make sure that we keep things steady in the region. Donc, ça me fait plaisir de répondre à vos questions. Essentiellement, lorsque vient la question de l'Ukraine, le Canada, on a été là dès le début, dès le jour 1. Nous avons investi massivement au niveau militaire, mais également à plusieurs autres niveaux avec l'Ukraine. D'ailleurs, c'est pourquoi nous avons signé une entente à long terme d'assurance auprès de l'Ukraine. Également, je voulais vous parler aussi de l'Indo-Pacifique. Le Canada est une nation du Pacifique et nous avons beaucoup investi dans la région. D'ailleurs, nous avons 3 frégates présentement dans la région de l'Indo-Pacifique. Nous sommes le partenaire de l'OTAN qui a le plus de frégates après les États-Unis. Alors, nous allons continuer d'être un partenaire sur lequel on peut compter dans la région, alors qu'on sait que les tensions s'élèvent peu à peu dans l'Indo-Pacifique. Alors, je suis prête à prendre vos questions. I'm ready to take your questions.
Minister, how concerned are you that a possible new U.S. administration might undermine efforts of the NATO allies to put in place new efforts to support Ukraine?
So first and foremost, Canada knows well the U.S. They're our neighbors, they're best friends. And when it comes to Ukraine, I'm convinced that the U.S. will find a way to continue to support Ukraine. It is important to remember that Russia is supported by China when it comes to Ukraine, and that is why we need to address these threats together.
Would you support a new
it's
fund?
realistic? Do you think it's realistic that NATO agrees on a $100 billion fund for the next 5 years for Ukraine as proposed by the Secretary General of NATO?
Well, of course, we're always there to support the different ideas that are presented by the Secretary General. We've already also committed a long-term security arrangement to Ukraine. Prime Minister Trudeau was there recently, a month ago, and it was one of the ideas that Canada put to the table at the G7 to make sure that Ukraine would be in a strong negotiating position one day when the war is over and Russia will still be a very dangerous neighbor. So we wanted to make sure that Ukraine could have access to these security assurances, these guarantees, until becoming a member of NATO. And that's why we continue to welcome any form of support that Ukraine can have, because we need to send a message to Ukrainians themselves, but we also need to send a message to Russia.
On Middle East, a couple of weeks ago, there are tourist activity, especially in Iraq. So Canada, one of the members of the ally against Daesh, ISIS. Are you concerned about that activity, tourist activity in Iraq?
Well, first and foremost, as you mentioned, yes, indeed, we're part of the NATO coalition that is anti-Daesh in Iraq. I was recently in the region and also met with our forces that are based out of Kuwait. We believe that when it comes to the Middle East, we are concerned of escalation. That is why the violence must stop. We need to make sure also that we work with different partners on keeping the region much more stable. We've called for a ceasefire back in December. We've also been clear when it comes to the Middle East that the hostages must be released, and at the same time humanitarian aid needs to go into Gaza. So unfortunately, a Canadian was killed in the IDF strike that targeted humanitarian workers from World Kitchen. My deepest condolences to their loved ones and family members. We call for a full investigation. We want to make sure that Israel looks directly into this issue. I've reached out last night to Israel Katz, my Israeli counterpart, on this very issue. Israel needs to respect international humanitarian law, and we will make sure that that is the case.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this virtual news conference. We're joined this afternoon by Minister Sean Fraser, the Minister of Housing, Infrastructure and Communities, and the Minister of Tourism, and the Minister responsible for the Economic Development Agency of Canada for the regions of Quebec, Minister Soraya Martinez. So I'm assuming the ministers have opening remarks. So we'll begin with opening remarks and then followed by a question and answer period on the Zoom platform. Over to you, ministers.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Merci tout le monde. C'est un plaisir d'être ici pour discuter une bonne annonce. And looking very much forward to sharing some further details. The announcement that was made earlier today in Winnipeg alongside the Prime Minister. The announcement today is the launch of the Canada Rental Protection Fund. It's important to understand why we need to advance this important initiative. Across Canada over the past 30 years, I should say over the 30-year leading up to 2017, before the launch of the National Housing Strategy, governments of different partisan stripe made the decision that it wasn't their responsibility to invest in affordable housing at the federal level. We made a change in 2017 with the launch of the National Housing Strategy so we could invest directly to build more affordable housing right across the country. But we also understand that over the course of that same period of time, a lot of the existing low-cost rentals across Canada have disappeared from the market and no longer provide opportunities for low-income households to find a place to live that they can actually afford. Sometimes that's because low-cost rentals aren't kept in a good state of repair and maintained properly and eventually need to be demolished. Other times it's because investors buy up these properties, renovate them, and charge a much higher price, displacing the low-income families who previously called those apartments home. The result of these different factors is that in Canada, less than 4% of the housing stock in this country is actually held in a non-market setting. To compare, the international average amongst OECD countries is about 8%. We need to do more to put more housing in a non-market setting to keep it affordable forever. That's where today's announcement comes in. The advancement of the Rental Protection Fund is going to put $1.5 billion of federal investments on the table in a combination of grants and financing that's going to help more nonprofits take ownership of buildings that will be kept as affordable housing for low-income families in perpetuity. Now, although this is a federal initiative, we expect that it's going to attract significant capital from the private sector because the investment will actually make sense with a public contribution. From the charitable sector, who I've had calls with, that is already working to collect different sources of capital, and from different levels of government, including the provincial government of British Columbia, who's established a similar fund previously, including the City of Toronto, who's received support through the Housing Accelerator Fund for the Mura program, and including today in the province of Manitoba, where Premier Canoe announced at the same event we held this morning, they would be making an initial investment to facilitate these same kind of transactions. When we actually look at what's driving challenges around homelessness, it's a lack of affordable housing. It's not a person's family history. It's not just mental health and addictions challenges. It's not a person's sexual orientation or race. It's a lack of affordable housing. We can actually end homelessness in this country if we build sufficient affordable housing stock. And today's announcement is going to have a meaningful impact that will put more low-cost rentals in the hands of nonprofits that will be kept as low-cost housing in perpetuity. Thank you very much. C'est un plaisir de passer la parole à ma collègue, Ministre Martinez-Ferrara.
Merci, Sean. Bonjour tout le monde. Écoutez, je vais dire un peu en français ce que Sean vient d'expliquer en anglais. C'est bien évident que pour s'attaquer à la crise du logement, il faut augmenter le nombre de logements, mais il faut aussi augmenter le nombre de logements abordables. Non seulement il faut protéger, en fait, ceux qui existent déjà, mais il faut s'assurer qu'on peut pérenniser l'abordabilité sur du long terme. On le voit très bien, on le voit, moi je suis une députée d'Hochelaga et je le vois régulièrement des gens qui se font évincer de leur logement et on perd à chaque année des milliers de logements abordables qui disparaissent. Soit les bâtiments sont
I'm making an executive decision. That stuff is just too boring. I did see some of it. I thought it might be a bit better. We're going to find something more fun to watch. Here's a couple of quick videos. We're just going to zip through these 3 quick ones. We'll come back, do some politics from today. Then we're going to watch some Jordan Peterson. But here's just 3 quick videos. I hope you enjoy them. Here we go.
Interested Canadian voters need to see this. They can make up their own minds, but they need to see this first. Hey folks, happy holidays. Not trying to get anybody revved up. Ehren here, Question Period Canada. But if you haven't signed Petition 4701, this might be why you want to. Not trying to get anybody revved up before the holidays. This will get you revved up.
Isn't it funny to listen to a trust fund baby lecturing Canadians about being too rich?
Mr. Speaker, we see proof that the Conservatives simply don't understand that low-income families don't benefit from tax breaks because they don't pay taxes.
Here's a little bit more about Trudeau. Here's just this thing about Trudeau, man. They knew he was untrustworthy maybe in the beginning, looks like. Now this petition is getting so many signatures, so many. This is the MP that started it all. He's got to go, maybe? I don't know. There's a lot of things mounting, I think, against Trudeau. Like, I've been watching a lot of politics, and he is very suspicious. His whole cabinet, they just seem suspicious. Like, I wish I had something better to say. Like, that's the leader of our country. Like it or not, that is. And until we have another election, you really don't have anything to say except maybe this petition. And I don't suggest that you sign it, but you should think about the idea, maybe. Like, again, none of my business what you think about your politics, but if you watch the politics, I've been watching, man, like, I was on the other side before. I just know that we need change. It's ridiculous. Listen to this guy. You should see him sometimes. I feel embarrassed for, like, Canadians because that is our leader. We're going to wrap this up and try to show you where the petition is and what that involves in signing it. It's really simple. It's very basic, but people just need to know that it's out there and this is an issue of the day. And if they'd like to take part in change, this might be the way to do it. Drop to Google and we're going to put in petition. Yeah, there it is. E4701. Put that in. The first 2 links. So sign this petition, go to that, and then look it over. Read it over, like, obviously, like, don't sign anything ever without reading it. So over, like, good advice. Check this one out. I think we're just fed up with where the government is taking us. So you can sign off. Then it just asks for your basic information. Fill that out and you're off to the races, like, good to go. So that's how you sign petition 4701. If you're interested in doing that, I'm not telling you to or suggesting even, just that if you want to know how, that's how. I'm Ehren, Question Period Canada. You've got questions, we've got answers, not really just more questions. Like and subscribe. We're having a good time with Canadian politics right here, all the time.
Catch you next video. Thanks for watching. There was a time, and it wasn't that long ago, that the NDP had a role in the Canadian government. It seems now the only role they have is keeping the Liberals in power. They could put them out of power, but they don't do that. Let's take a look at when it started breaking down. JAGMEET loses his mind right here, says he's going to be the next Prime Minister. There's no chance, bud.
When I'm Prime Minister, I will keep my promises. Now, another promise, let me try again. Order. Order.
Credit where credit is due, JAGMEET tries again to say that he's going to be the next Prime Minister or when he's going to be the next Prime Minister, but he gets laughed out again.
Just calm down, everybody take a deep breath. The honourable member for Burnaby South, from the top, please.
Absolutely. For the folks over here, when I'm Prime Minister, I will keep my promises. Absolutely. Now, let me try again. There's another promise that this Prime Minister made that would certainly help the crisis in our healthcare system. He promised a guaranteed...
I'm sorry.
Peter Julian and Jenny Kwan are clapping in the background there like something good is going on, but it's not. This is the downfall of the NDP. Their current leader has no balls, and he doesn't care about Canadians. He cares about his pension, I think. He gives it a third go. Let's take a peek. It's embarrassing.
Now we know that there's some people in this chamber that like the number 3. So when I'm Prime Minister, I will keep my promise. But let me try again. There's another promise the Prime Minister made that would certainly help in this healthcare crisis. He promised a guaranteed wage of at least $25 an hour for long-term care workers. Now, this would help free up spaces in the hospital so seniors could go into a long-term care home and get the proper respect and treatment that they need.
Yes.
Now, did the Prime Minister mean what he said, or was he hoping that a fight with the provinces would mean that he didn't have to deliver on this promise either?
Here. Full Prime Minister.
Maybe Jagmeet Singh lost his mind. Maybe he only cares about his pension, not Canadians anymore. The NDP party used to represent the hard-working Canadian unionized people, but there's not a lot of those left, because this Liberal government's been plucking away. It's tough times. Let's see how some of the other NDP MPs are reacting to the Liberal coalition government. I don't think they're very satisfied. When you see these clips, I think that you'll agree. They seem pissed off to have to follow the lead of the Liberal government, because where is that heading?
The honourable member from Vancouver East.
Canadians from coast to coast need affordable homes today. People are living in tent encampments, being evicted from their homes, or trapped paying sky-high rent. And the Liberals continue to delay and disappoint. In their fall economic statement, by delaying funding until 2025 means affordable homes won't be built for at least another 7 years. This is absurd and completely out of touch. Will this Prime Minister commit to roll out the money now so that shovels can get into the ground and build the homes that Canadians desperately need?
The Honourable Minister for Health.
My question to Jenny Kwan after seeing that ramble, which makes valid points, is how can you be a part of a coalition government with the Liberals when you're an NDP MP representing your constituents?
Bay.
Well, this Prime Minister has given billions for EV battery plants, but he has no plan for supplying Canadian critical minerals to make these EV battery operations a Canadian success. There are metal deposits right now in Sudbury, Thompson, Timmins that are ready to go into operation, but they need a federal partner. Without a tax credit strategy, the auto industry is going to be getting its metal from China, Indonesia, or Congo, places with much lower environmental, human rights, and wage standards. Why is this Prime Minister continuing to botch a made-in-Canada solution so that we can be a true clean energy leader?
In glass houses, we don't throw stones, Charlie Angus. But come on, why don't you do something about it, Charlie Angus, then?
Have an accurate picture of the infrastructure gap facing First Nations, and the numbers are truly vile. $350 billion. This is First Nations like Shamattawa facing a housing crisis. It's the long-term boil water advisory in Pucketawagan and 27 other First Nations. It's crumbling schools like the one in Tatasquiac Cree Nation. It's the forced isolation of communities like Wasagamak and Pungasi who desperately need an airport. It's unacceptable, but what's this government's solution? Cuts to Indigenous services. Why are the Liberals punishing First Nations for Liberal failures?
Nikki Ashton seems to be smart as a tack, but why in the hell is she following the lead of this JAGMEET Singh into like this coalition government with the Liberals, destroying our country, breaking it down person by person?
Malahat Langford.
You know, I almost feel a little bit sorry for the minister. He made such a big deal out of his meeting with the grocery CEOs, and now Metro has admitted that it had zero impact on food prices. And Mr. Speaker, any Canadian who's been watching food prices soar could have told the Liberal government that. Instead of standing up to CEOs, the minister has danced around price gouging for 2 years. The Liberal plan isn't working. With the holidays coming, prices are only going to get worse. So will the government support the NDP's bill to lower food prices and end the gouging?
The Honourable Minister.
This type of coalition government was recently tried in Germany. Check out their economy, and it's still trying to recover, but maybe they're never going to get ahead again. Alistair McGregor knows this, and he has this ramble, but come on, bro. Like, help Canadians out. Remember your constituents.
A 45-year-old woman in London, Ontario, who works full-time and makes above minimum wage, is living out of her car because this government failed to offer her affordable housing options. While the out-of-touch Liberals failed to deliver homes people can actually afford in their community, the corporate-controlled Conservatives sold off 800,000 affordable homes to rich developers when they were in power. Canadians deserve better. When will this government start building homes people can actually afford so they don't have to live out of their cars?
Yeah. Hear, hear.
Are Liberal MPs voting for Lindsay Matheson? Remember her constituents? Like, it seems really fake when you see it there, knowing that she's backing the Liberals.
Her Parliament unanimously supported my motion recognizing missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls and Two-Spirit people as a Canada-wide emergency. But how many times is MMIWG mentioned in the Liberals' fall economic statement? Zero. And earlier this year, the government slashed $150 million from women's shelters. Major municipalities have called gender-based violence an epidemic. So can the government explain why they're ignoring MMIWG and are slashing money from women's shelters?
So Leah here goes on a rant like she's righteous. But if you were righteous, you'd remember the people that did elect you. They don't want the Liberals. We won an election. Leah, come on.
Member for North Island Powell River.
Mr. Speaker, families are having to take turkey off their Christmas dinner menu because of sky-high food costs. And what are the Liberals doing? Letting their grocery CEO friends off the hook. While the corporate Conservatives, they just want to block a national school food program to feed our kids. Shame. Both have lost the holiday spirit. What does the minister have to say to Canadians who are cutting back this Christmas because he won't stand up to CEOs?
Rachel Blaney is trying to put the blame on the Liberals, But you're part of the problem, Rachel. Remember your constituents. These Liberals didn't vote you in. Canadians, your constituents want them gone.
The Liberal position is appalling, not responsible. For 2 months, this government has sat and watched while 18,000 innocent civilians have lost their lives and have refused to call for a ceasefire. We need a ceasefire. We need the hostages removed. Last week, it was reported that Liberal donors were withholding support because of the moral failure of the Liberals. Today, there is an important vote at the United Nations. The Liberals have failed to listen to the Palestinian people and to Canadian Palestinians. Will they at least listen to their fundraisers and vote for a ceasefire today?
Ceasefire! The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Heather McPherson is wild. Like, she goes off there, but she's such a hypocrite. Like, how can you back the Liberal government, which you could take down and all of your voters want you to do that, but you get up there like you've got some righteous plan? Heather, you're full of shit. So what do you think? Have you seen enough Liberal, NDP MPs that are not listening to their voters? We won an election and they're not giving us one. They could make that happen. It's distracting. It's hard to understand. My name's Ehren. This is Question Period Canada. Hope you've enjoyed the video. We'll be back with more. Like and subscribe. Comment, please. Share it with somebody. Have something healthy to eat and try to stay warm. All right. Take care. Hey there, everyone. Ehren here, Question Period Canada. We've got an exciting video to show. We met a wild one last night. Stephanie Kusi. She's an MP from Mindapore, Alberta, and she flips out about the ArriveCan scam app. Boy, oh boy, she lets the Liberals have it. Finger pointing, accusations. It's exciting. Let's take a peek. It's pretty funny too. Let's look.
Colleagues, I would appreciate it if you give your attention to the next speaker who is being recognized by the speaker, the member from Calgary, Mindapore.
Damning new information revealed today shows that ArriveCan contractors submitted receipts to the government for a company that doesn't even exist. Wow. This investigation already includes allegations of identity theft, forged resumes, contractual theft, fraudulent billing, price fixing, and collusion in the creation of the $54 million ArriveCan app. How much worse can this boondoggle get? Simple question, which Liberal insiders got rich?
Who got rich?
Did she say boondoggle? So over $50 million missing with the ArriveCan app scam. That's an issue. Stephanie Kusi, if you didn't know her name before, you won't forget now. She's an MP from Mindapore, Alberta, and she certainly let the Liberals have it. It was a lot of fun. That's what we're doing here. Canadian politics with humor. So like and subscribe if that sounds like your thing. We'll be making lots of videos, already lots out there. We'll catch you next time. Thanks for watching. All right, hey friends, what's up? It's Ehren. We're going to jump into another one, another piece. This is something different that I tried, and this is a piece from Justin from yesterday that I tried editing, and we'll see.
The Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau,
a different way of
with us in studio. Prime Minister, welcome back here. It feels a bit like an election campaign. You're zipping across the country here and there, announcing things with big dollar signs attached to them.
Well, we got a big budget coming out, and it's one that's focused on the fact that far too many young people, particularly millennials and Gen Z, don't feel like the system works for them anymore. Even if they have a great job, they are squeezed on housing, they're squeezed on rent, they can't save up for buying a home, they're pressed on groceries, they're seeing a world where climate change is getting worse and worse, they're worried about their future, and government has a role in making sure that there is fairness for them.
Let me talk what else you seem to speak about. People are focused on the price on carbon. We have seen an increase up to, $80 per ton this week. A litre of gas now costs 3 cents more. Do you think you've made a convincing case to Canadians that that increase is a good thing?
Well, I think we can put the case aside for a second and let's talk about the actual policy.
The case matters because people are protesting, wondering.
The case matters, but let's make sure we're talking about the same thing. We designed a price on pollution in this country that gives more money back to average Canadians, to 8 out of 10 Canadian families, particularly middle-income and low-income people. So we're not only fighting climate change, we're putting more money in the pockets of folks who need it through the Canada Carbon Rebate. That's the framework we built with all premiers working together back in 2016.
Do you think you've made that case?
I think we're continuing to make that case. It's understandable that at a time of anxiety, of pressure on costs, of affordability concerns, that some politicians are trying to drum up support for themselves by scaring people and by giving misinformation. It's unfortunate, but we're going to continue telling the truth. I think what we've actually done in the policy, it is helping Canadians. Now, the fact that Conservative premiers or the Conservative leader of the opposition wants to take away those supports for Canadians, that's something that people need to hear, and that's not something that they're talking about. So we're continuing to talk about the fact that they have no plan to fight climate change and no plan to keep supporting people with affordability.
Of course, it's not just Conservative premiers, though. It's Wab Kinew in Manitoba. It's a fellow Liberal in Andrew Furey in Newfoundland and Labrador. What would it take for them to convince you that this is not the right policy?
Well, they have the opportunity to put forward a pricing frame that makes sure that pollution isn't free at the same level for the rest of the country, but in a way that works for their province if they don't want to have the federal backstop. Indeed, a number of provinces started with that. BC and Quebec still have it. Ontario actually only has the carbon tax because Doug Ford got rid of the cap and trade system. So as he rails against the price on pollution and the rebate we're giving to Ontario, he's actually responsible directly for it because he scrapped the Made in Ontario pricing plan they had.
So Andrew Furey has said that he wants a meeting with you to talk about this. He wants the premiers to come together with you. Will you have that meeting?
I had a meeting in 2016
will
with
you
all
have the,
premiers.
Will you have
when
the
we built
meeting
this.
now with?
I will continue to talk with premiers, but I will continue to be pressing Andrew and all others on the actual facts that we have a plan to fight climate change that puts more money back in the pockets of Canadians that need it.
One of the reasons why there's great anxiety over this is because, as you've said, there are a lot of people who feel like the system is stacked against them. Young people in particular, they do everything they can. They get a good job. They're working hard. They can't square that circle. You've had 9 years in power. To what extent is your government responsible for the fact that that system is stacked against them?
We got elected in 2015 focused on supporting the middle class, and we brought in a number of measures that made a huge difference. We cut child poverty in half in this country with the Canada Child Benefit. But particularly since the pandemic, we've seen things get so much more difficult for so many people, particularly the young people who've been my motivation since I got into politics 15 years ago. So investing in them, supporting them as renters, making sure there's a pathway for them to buy a home, making sure that they're confident that the world's not going to be on fire when they're adults and raising their own kids, so we fight climate change. These things matter.
Hey friends, what's up? Ehren here, Question Period Canada. We've got an exciting episode today. Pierre Poilievre the other day went off. He was on fire, so many insults. Each question was littered with insults to Trudeau and the Liberals and their policies and ideas. It was fun. We're going to swing right into it. Watch Pierre on fire. Here we go.
Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Prime Minister is not worth the cost or the division after 8 years. Panicking under pressure from MPs in a region where he's plummeting in the polls, he'd paused the tax for some people in some places, but his minister said that other people should have voted Liberal if they wanted the same break. Now the panicking Prime Minister is further dividing the country with the confirmation from his Environment Minister that he's now in a coalition with the Bloc, the Separatist Party. So we have a costly carbon tax coalition that includes the Separatists. What did he promise the Separatists to get them to sign on to keeping him in power for 2 more years?
I'll drop in after some of the questions just to keep it flowing, give a little bit of information about what was happening. But I'd like to point out first, in that initial question, the first one, I counted 13 insults in the question. You can go back and count for yourself. I counted 13. How many do you get? Poilievre doesn't stop. All the questions are littered with insults. Here's another one.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister's own Environment Commissioner confirmed he will not hit his own targets, and the Prime Minister has admitted that his carbon tax is not worth the cost for oil-heated homes. Now, he did that to save his political hide, but his desperation went one step further this week when he relied on the separatists to vote with him to quadruple the tax on home heating for everyone else in Canada. So the question is very clear. What did he promise the separatists to get their support to save his political hide and quadruple his tax?
In that question, Pierre, I think there was 11 insults. That's how many I counted. Again, you can go back and look, or while you're watching the next piece, you can start counting. I counted 11 that time. Pierre's not done. He's just getting started. Eventually, Trudeau's going to break down. We'll show that at the end. Trudeau does pop. He tries to make a comeback. It's lame, but it's interesting and fun to watch him freak out. So we'll provide that at the end. In the meantime, there's a lot more questions coming. Here we go. Here's another one.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, after 8 years, he hasn't eliminated coal-fired electricity. He hasn't eliminated oil-powered heating in homes, and his carbon tax will not allow him to meet his own GHG targets, according to his Environment Commissioner. Now, that is the reality, that his carbon tax is not worth the cost. And that's why people, all 10 premiers, Conservative, Liberal, and NDP, are calling for him to take the tax off so Canadians will keep the heat on. Will he be fair to all Canadians, or will he sign on with the separatists to divide our country some more?
So how many insults were in that question? How many did you count? This is how I'm doing it. If he says your separatist buddies who are dividing the country, that's 2 insults. That's how I'm doing it. It might be splitting hairs, but to me, those are 2 insults. What has just happened, though, before his next question, is JAGMEET and Trudeau had a lover's quarrel. Strange coalition government going at each other, but they did. And so Pierre makes fun of that, and then he has a question for farmers.
Most tragic and heartbreaking to see these two squabbling in this way. The Prime Minister was so disappointed in the NDP leader's flip-flop on carbon tax for heat, but the good news for the Prime Minister is the NDP leader has flip-flopped on his flip-flop and now supports the Prime Minister's plan to quadruple the tax. This, with 2 million Canadians, a record-smashing number, going to a food bank. Will the Prime Minister create another carve-out on the carbon tax for farmers so that Canadians can afford to eat?
So many insults, right? It is fun to watch. One of the things that Poilievre does that I find interesting, not a lot of other politicians do it as often as Poilievre does, is that he puts at the end of his question, yes or no, please. He does that here.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister is quadrupling his carbon tax on the farmers who make the food, quadrupling the tax on the truckers who ship the food, therefore quadrupling the tax on all who buy the food. Good news is there is a common sense Conservative bill that's passed through the House and in the Senate where the Prime Minister's senators are holding it up. Will the Prime Minister once again cave and allow another carve-out on the carbon tax for farmers? Yes or no?
It must be really hard to dodge a question the way that Trudeau does, especially when somebody says, yes or no, please. Like, Poilievre does that, sticks it to him. I'd like to take this opportunity right now, though, to let you know that I am not a die-hard Conservative or something like that. I'm looking for change. Poilievre seems like the option. He is entertaining. Like, he is fun to watch the way that he trashes Trudeau. And these days, I kind of feel like trashing Trudeau. I voted for him in 2015. Not proud, but that's the way it goes. Anyway, let's take a look at Pierre throwing some more insults. He opens up with an insult right here.
Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
The Prime Minister won't answer a simple question. It's about the common sense Conservative bill to carve out farming from the carbon tax. But I understand why he feels he's in a bind, because his Environment Minister said, as long as I am Environment Minister, there will be no more exceptions to carbon pricing. That implies that he would resign if there was another carve-out. Will the Prime Minister sacrifice his crazy carbon tax minister and support our common sense bill to take the tax off.
Right there in that question, he was insulting Stephen Guilbeault, who's the Minister of the Environment. Yeah, and he follows up the next question with attacking the failures of the Liberal government not achieving their environmental goals, climate change goals. Here it is.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Tax isn't working. He's missed every single target. He's on track to miss his 2030 targets, and Canada is ranked 58th out of 63 on climate action. Mr. Speaker, the question is about our farmers. There's a bill C-234, a common sense conservative bill to carve out farmers from the carbon tax. All it needs is for the Prime Minister to give his senators permission to adopt this carve out. Will the Prime Minister stand up to his Environment Minister and stand up for farmers and let Bill C-234 pass and allow this carve-out to go ahead?
So you can see what Poilievre is doing, yes? He's putting space between what Guilbeault said, the Minister of the Environment, making decisions for the government, and Trudeau, who's saying that he will possibly lean back on the carbon tax for certain people. It's interesting. Poilievre next is going to be asking Trudeau to focus on answering the questions and not giving misinformation in his answers. Here's that. Let's take a look.
Stating falsehoods about our position will not distract from the original question. Here is the question. The Minister of Rural Development said that if people in the prairies wanted a pause on the carbon tax for home heat, they should elect more Liberals. Does the Prime Minister denounce these comments, or does he agree with them?
All right, everyone. 2 more questions. One more where it just shows how clever Poilievre can be, because Trudeau gives an answer saying that he was helping some Canadians, and he opens up with this line in the next question. And the next question we'll cover after that will result in Trudeau losing it. We're going to show that because it's a lot of fun, but here's the second last question. Listen to all the insults in the question.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
We're there for all Canadians. But this is really troubling. We thought that perhaps it was a gaffe when his Liberal Rural Affairs Minister said that the prairies would have to elect more Liberals if they wanted a pause. And if this really is just a fair policy that applies evenly across the country, then why would you have to elect more of any particular party in your region to benefit from it? So I'll just give him one last chance. If he can't answer it, we'll assume that he agrees with her. Does he agree with his Rural Affairs Minister that if the prairies want to pause on the carbon tax pain, they have to elect more Liberals? Yes or no?
All right, everybody, we're here. This is the question where Trudeau does lose it. He can't take any more of Poilievre. He caves under the pressure, does this dramatic speech. I don't know. It is entertaining to watch. I kind of find it just foolish, but that's Trudeau for you. And that's what Poilievre does to these politicians. He cracks them up. Here's that.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister only divides to distract. That's all he ever does when he gets into trouble. He divides people along every possible battle line. He did that with the carbon tax carve-out for only some in a region where his support is plummeting and his caucus is revolting. And for 10 days, he refused to condemn the comments of his own Liberal minister who said this policy was applying based on how people voted. And now he signs on with the separatists to divide Canadians again. Will he, instead of dividing Canadians, reverse the policies that are driving them to the food bank?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we see the Conservatives' approach to partisan politics and to personal attacks. The reality is, when we stood with the 80 to 90% of Canadians who chose to get vaccinated, they called us divisive. When we chose to stand with women across this country who want to control their own bodies, they called us divisive. When we stand with the 2 LGBTQI+ kids who are being discriminated against in schools across this country, they call us divisive, Mr. Speaker. I ask Canadians, who are dividing Canadians more than Conservatives with their attacks, with their choices, with their politics?
Well, holy moly, he flies off the handle there. He did go to theater school, acting school. He wanted to be an actor. There he tried to act like he was being a real politician. Comes off like a jackass in my opinion, but that's what Poilievre does. Puts on the pressure and he cracked. So that's fun. My name's Ehren. This is Question Period Canada. We're having fun with Canadian politics. It's what we're doing here, and it is fun. We'll catch you next time. Hope you enjoyed the video. We've got lots of other things to check out, so click on one of those. Yeah, like, subscribe, share with somebody. I'm Ehren, Question Period Canada. We're out. Hope you enjoyed the video. Hey friends, what's up? Ehren here, Question Period Canada. Really exciting episode coming down the tubes. I've got a couple of questions for you. How long have you known who Pierre Poilievre is? A lot of people think that he just wound up on the scene recently. He's been in the House of Parliament since 2004. Here's another question. Were you following the 2019 campaign, the election in 2019? I wasn't. I voted Liberal in 2015 and kind of gave up after that, wasn't paying attention. I thought times were good. But it would seem that Pierre, in his crystal ball, knew that Trudeau was up to no good with all of this borrowing. You've got to balance your budget. I found a debate from 2019. It's super interesting. They look so young. Oh, to be the age I was in 2019 again. Anyway, we're going to jump right into it. It's interesting to watch. Check this out.
The Prime Minister famously said, and I quote, "I no longer have dealings with the way our family fortune is managed." Good problem to have, Mr. Speaker. Unfortunately, because he's never had to balance a household budget, he thinks budgets balance themselves. He's not worried about costs because he makes others pay for his mistakes. The problem is that his never-ending deficits will sooner or later lead to higher taxes. Will he be honest with Canadians and tell them before the election how much taxes will go up and who will have to pay?
Prime Minister.
I can't help it. I find it super interesting that looking back at that piece from 2019, it seems so crystal clear. Maybe it didn't in 2019. Poilievre seemed to be onto it though. Yeah, so that's Poilievre's piece, and now we're gonna see Trudeau. He looks so young, guys. He used to be handsome. Now he looks like a jackass, I find. I can't trust a word out of his mouth. Once bitten, I suppose, but he does look really good, and the way he delivers his answer, it sounds solid.
Opposite don't understand anything about transparency and accountability, but I put my portfolio in a blind trust so that I can work on the responsibilities as a leader and indeed as a prime minister with impartiality. But it's interesting that they won't ask that same question in English that was just asked in French about giving to Quebec a single tax filing. I will always stand up to defend the interests of Quebecers and indeed all Canadians, but I was also stand up for what's good for Canadians and stand against pandering to the provinces.
I figured a small part out, something that might be wrong with Trudeau. Having Poilievre go at you like this every day in Parliament, that might break you down, make you a little loopy, make your planning terrible. It's just funny because Poilievre has been going at him for years. It's not going to slow down. It was pretty good back then. It's hard.
The honourable member for Carleton.
Blind trust. What the Prime Minister is asking of taxpayers is that they blindly trust him, that he can spend a great fortune, amass enormous debts, set on track permanent and growing deficits, and trust that no one will ever have to pay for it. Canadians do not have inherited family fortunes. They know that budgets don't balance themselves. Will he tell them the real cost that his taxes will impose on everyday Canadians after the election?
Prime Minister.
So the piece that Poilievre is saying there about blind trust, I feel that. Like when Trudeau is talking about free heat pumps, he might as well be talking about dragons and unicorns. I know these things don't exist. So I can't blindly trust our leader anymore. Poilievre's on him. Trudeau answers pretty well. You can almost trust it except that you know how it works out. That's the piece. Listen to his answer.
For 10 years, Mr. Speaker, the member opposite and the Conservative government under Mr. Harper kept giving tax breaks and benefits to the wealthiest Canadians in the hopes that that would lead to growth and opportunity for all Canadians. Well, it didn't. It failed miserably because under Stephen Harper, Canada had the worst growth record since the Great Depression. We made a different choice to lower taxes for the middle class, to invest in folks who needed our help with things like the Canada Child Benefit, the Guaranteed Income Supplement increase for seniors, the Canada Workers Benefit. These are the things that have made a difference.
Member for Carleton.
The plans that Trudeau's talking about there, they kind of sound like they make sense. Except we know years later, they didn't make sense and they didn't work out. In his answer, he pisses Poilievre off, and you can tell with the next question that Poilievre has. He comes out of the gate firing. I do like Poilievre, he's very entertaining and he looks like he's the next guy, but he does get pissed off when you bring up Stephen Harper and when the role that Poilievre played in that government. He's very sensitive about it, you can just tell.
Well, isn't it funny to listen to a trust fund baby lecturing Canadians about being too rich?
That's right.
He says that people who take the bus are too rich and therefore should lose their transit tax credit. Soccer moms and hockey dads, Prime Minister says they're too rich, so he takes away their children's fitness tax credit. At the same time, he forces these same working class families to pay for his taxpayer-funded nannies. Will he put aside the hypocritical class warfare and tell us the true cost of his tax increases that he would bring in if he got reelected?
The Honourable Prime Minister.
Told you that he pissed him off, called him a trust fund baby a couple of times in there, and really came with the insults. You could tell he was upset. Let's see how Trudeau answers. Except that we know how it ends. It didn't sound like a bad plan, but that's why we can't trust this guy anymore, right? That's why I can't, at least.
See proof that the Conservatives simply don't understand that low-income families don't benefit from tax breaks because they don't pay taxes. We have moved forward on investing directly in low and middle-income families with the Canada Child Benefit that'll actually directly benefit them. We have lifted hundreds of thousands.
I ask the Honourable Opposition House Leader, and others, order. To come to order and not to be yelling when someone else has the floor. Order. The Right Honourable Prime Minister has the floor. For a few seconds.
Mr. Speaker, non-refundable tax breaks do not benefit low-income families. That is why we changed their way of sending tax breaks to millionaire families and instead give the money directly to the families who needed it.
So I don't know if you follow the channel or not, but I left that piece in with Jeff Regan, the House Speaker, making everybody behave. It reminds me of Greg Fergus, the new terror that's messing up the flow of question period in the Commons. Greg Fergus is terrible. Anyhow, now we see Justin's answer. It's brutal when we know how it works out. They're not making anybody rich. They're making everybody poor. They're making some corporations very, very rich. But everybody else, all of us, people that used to be middle class that are now upper, lower class, it's not good. And that is why, I consider myself once bitten, twice shy. I don't have anything necessarily against the Liberals. I'm not a conservative in my heart. I'm a voter. I don't like the way that the way times are. It's really, really tough out there. And it doesn't look like they're going to change their course of action. The Conservatives look like they will change some things up. Anyhow, I wanted to bring this video to give you some insight into what has been going on. It's been like this for a while, and you can't just listen to what you're told and believe everything to be true. That goes for both sides, but it definitely goes for the Liberals and Trudeau for sure. We're gonna go out on this little piece. It's just to show you the toil that Poilievre has had on Trudeau over the years. He's going to ask him a pretty simple question here. We've played this a couple of times on the channel, but it's funny. He asks him a question about food banks. I just showed this, but I'm going to show it again. Back firing about women's rights and transsexual children being harassed in schools. When it was a question about food banks, So that's just kind of funny. Like, it's not funny because that's our leader. Whether you like it or not, currently that is. Whether you feel it or not, on paper. Like and subscribe. I'm Ehren. Enjoy this last part of the video. It's a laugh. It's always fun making these. Like and subscribe. Like I say, we're having fun here with Canadian politics. At the same time, we are getting informed. So that's great. Take care, everybody. We'll catch you next video.
Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister only divides to distract. That's all he ever does when he gets into trouble. He divides people along every possible battle line. He did that with the carbon tax carve-out for only some in a region where his support is plummeting and his caucus is revolting. And for 10 days, he refused to condemn the comments of his own Liberal minister who said this policy was applying based on how people voted. And now he signs on with the separatists to divide Canadians again. Will he, instead of dividing Canadians, reverse the policies that are driving them to the food bank?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we see the Conservatives' approach to partisan politics and to personal attacks. The reality is, when we stood with the 80 to 90% of Canadians who chose to get vaccinated, they called us divisive. When we chose to stand with women across this country who want to control their own bodies, they called us divisive. When we stand with the 2S LGBTQI+ kids who are being discriminated against in schools across this country, they call us divisive, Mr. Speaker. I ask Canadians, who are dividing Canadians more than Conservatives with their attacks, with their choices, with their politics?
Yeah, we'll get a mic going. And now we're going to drop into some Jordan Peterson. I don't know what else to go on with for Friday. People like Jordan Peterson. Whether you like him or don't like him, people enjoy watching him. And I enjoy watching him and I like him. So we're going to watch some Jordan Peterson. This is a good piece. I think you'll enjoy it. I don't think this caught a lot of views when it went out.
I'm Professor Jordan Peterson. I'm a clinical psychologist and a professor of psychology at the University of Toronto. And I teach and I have a clinical practice, although I'm on hiatus right now. I do a lot of business consulting. I have a business online that helps people plan their futures and write about their past and analyze their personalities. And for the last year or so, I've been embroiled in a philosophical and political controversy, a series of them, I suppose, in Canada, and more broadly as well. So the question is, why does public shaming work on the human mind? Well, it's a good thing that it works. You know, I mean, it takes a lot of different emotions to make people properly social. And some of those are positive emotions. We enjoy being around other people. So that would be a straight positive emotion associated with approach and excitement and fun. We bond with other people, and that's a different emotional system, a number of them, mediated partly by opiates and partly by chemicals like, now I won't be able to remember the name, oxytocin. But then there's negative emotions too. So if you're a conscientious person, for example, you feel guilt if you're not contributing to the community. And if you're not sociopathic, you feel shame if you've acted in a manner that indicates that you're not a reliable member of the social organization. And you should feel that way. Now, of course, the problem with negative emotions, and positive emotions for that matter, is that they can be amplified beyond utility. That happens in all sorts of mental illnesses. And they can be manipulated. And then, of course, with regards to our current state, which is something we've never encountered before, is that you can be the target of hundreds of thousands or even millions of people suddenly, and it's absolutely overwhelming. So most of these things are necessary, but you know, they can go badly astray. and they can be manipulated. So, and we don't know what to do about that, especially with regards to social media, because nobody knows anything about social media, really. It's too new. So. I don't know if the media per se has hijacked shame. I think that ideologues hijack shame regularly. You know, you saw this, for example, under the Maoists in particular, where they used public shaming constantly as an ideological tactic. And so now, to the degree that the media, let's say, whatever that is now, is complicit in pushing an ideological narrative forward, you know, and maybe the postmodernists would argue that you're always pushing an ideological narrative forward no matter what you're doing. They're participating in the harnessing of shame for specific political ends. And, well, if you believe, like the postmodernists do, that the world is nothing but a stage of competition between different groups who are competing fundamentally for power, then there's no way out of that. But I think that's an unbelievably dismal view of the world. I also think part of the reason that there's an alternative media growing, particularly on YouTube, is because there are ways of presenting information that aren't precisely ideologically motivated. Now, it's tricky because you have to have a framework through which you look at the world in order to understand the world. And it does tend to be a narrative framework, because narratives tell you how to get from one point to the other. And human beings are always getting from one point to the other. I mean, we're alive, that's what we do. And so this is something Jean Piaget, a developmental psychologist, pointed out. In some ways, the truth is not so much a set of facts, although there are forms of truth like that, as a process. And the people who are popular on YouTube, Joe Rogan's a good example, is he brings people in and they have a discussion. And the truth is actually in the process of the discussion. And the reason I think Rogan works so well is because he's actually trying to learn something when he's talking to his guests. He isn't driving forward his a priori notions. He has them, because everyone does, but he's looking to expand them and transform them during the conversation. And so the truth of the conversation isn't so much in the conclusions as in the dialectical process by which those conclusions are generated. And people actually really like to listen to that. So when I lecture, for example, because my lectures have become quite popular on YouTube, I'm not telling people what conclusions I have drawn, although I can't help but do that to some degree. I'm trying to extend my knowledge of the topic while I'm lecturing. And so what that enables people to watch is the process by which new maps of the world, that's a good way of thinking about it, come into being. And that's very exciting for people. Well, that's what we do in a conversation like this, if it's a real conversation. You know, we're trying to figure out what's going on, rather than to state categorically, this is what's going on and these are the people behind it. It's like, well, no, we can toss out hypotheses, we can try to figure it out, and that's what makes the conversation engaging and interesting. A lot of these new interviewers, let's say, run very long shows. They're not sound bites, they're not clips, they haven't been run through the production mill, and actually people on YouTube don't like that sort of thing. They like it raw. There's lots of people on YouTube, like Girl Says What, Karen Strawn. She just sits at her kitchen table and talks, and there's a bit of editing, you know, to get rid of the ums and that sort of thing, but you get the whole thing. You get to draw your own damn conclusions. And I think that's, we were talking a little bit about truth. It's like, if you're a journalist, see, this journalist came and did a story about me in a magazine called Toronto Life last year, and he did quite a bit of background research, and the article was actually pretty well researched, but he couldn't resist the temptation to tell his readers what to think, you know, and so he had some opinions about me, and they weren't particularly positive, and so he'd lay out some of the background information that he had gathered, and then he'd tell the readers what that meant. And the piece came out, and I wasn't very happy with it, and so I wrote him and I said, you know, like, kudos on your background research, and why the hell didn't you just let the readers make up their own damn minds? You don't have any trust in your journalistic ability, you don't have any trust in your audience, so you wrote a propaganda piece. Now you might say, well, you can't help but introduce your biases, and of course, to some degree that's true, but you can present, see, the world's too complex to describe completely. And so you have to lay a structure on it in order to simplify it. And you might say because of that, there's no way of getting at the truth, because you have to lay this structure on it and simplify it. But that's actually not technically correct. Like, imagine that, because when you simplify the world, you're basically compressing it like a compression algorithm. And if you use an unbiased compression algorithm to represent a set of data, then you sample equally from the entire data set. You don't take all the data, but you sample equally, and then you get a representation of the whole. It's an accurate representation, it's just not as detailed. Well, that's sort of what you want to do as a journalist, to the degree that you can. You know, and partly you understand that you have biases, so you talk to people who have different opinions, or maybe you even figure out what the different opinions are and make them strong and address them while you're telling the story. And to say that you can't do that is, well, I think it's deeply and insanely cynical, because it also means, if you can't do that, it also means you can't communicate. You know, if there's no truth, why do people talk to each other? What the hell's the point? We wouldn't communicate if there was no way of communicating truth. It would be pointless. The postmodernists tend not to admit, in some sense, to the existence of the objective world. You know, and I think that's fundamentally a complexity issue, is that there's a world that exists beyond our comprehension of it, and so that's the simplification problem. But the problem with the consensus theory of reality is that, well, there are obstacles in the world that you bump into regardless of your damn consensus. And so you can argue that that's not the case, but it's futile. I mean, because you learn in your own experience that there are elements of reality, even within your subjective experience, that your interpretive structure can't lay a hand on. You can't argue yourself out of being hungry, especially if you're really hungry. You can't argue yourself, sometimes you can't argue yourself out of being in love, even if you know it's the wrong person. You can't, and fundamentally, you can't argue yourself out of pain. You know, and that's why I think that the ultimate truth in some sense is that life is suffering. It's like, good luck laying down an ideological overlay on that. Like, you can adjust your pain to some degree through thought, you know. It is malleable to some degree, but not in the final analysis. And so arguing that the world, that a separate world of constraints beyond your interpretive framework doesn't exist is, it's futile, it's not going to work for you, and B, you never act that way. You know, people who talk about science as, say, a patriarchal Western construction, you know, they're making observations that the scientific method is, first of all, to some degree, a consequence of the subjective interest of the researcher. Fair enough. And that researchers are subject to ambition like everyone else. And hey, absolutely. But part of the scientific method is the competition of ambitions and the decision through the competing ambitions about what actually constitutes the shared ground of experience. And you might say, well, I don't believe in any of that. It's like, yes, you do. You use computers. You fly on airplanes. You drink filtered water. You participate in the technological society. And you, by participating in it, you indicate your assent to the ontological presuppositions and the epistemological presuppositions upon which it's based. And you might say, well, no, I don't. And I would say, well, who cares what you say? I'm going to watch how you act, and as a better indicator of your fundamental truth. And there's no reason to assume whatsoever that what you say and what you do are in alignment. Like, they might be, but often with people they're not in alignment at all. So, and the postmodernists are a classic example of that. They wouldn't turn to Marxism otherwise. You know, because the postmodernists say, well, there's no grand narrative, everything, in some sense everything is a matter of contextual interpretation. And then that leaves them with nothing and nowhere to go. So the Marxism comes in as a substitute for that. Or maybe even the postmodernism was just a rationalization for the Marxism to begin with. It's not obvious from the historical record. But they don't act out their claims because they can't. So this post-truth idea is that's a demonic idea, really. I mean, you know, that's strange language to use, but there are some ideas that are so pathological that only archetypal descriptions are appropriate. Well, you know, it's always a question to some degree which of our partial realities is true and which of them is false. It is to some degree context dependent as well, because the environment tends to move around, you know, like, so you might say that there was a set of relatively more radical left-wing ideas that were more appropriate in 1964 than they are now, say with regards to civil rights. And because the underlying situation has actually changed, and so the representation should change. Is it false consciousness? Well, that's a very deep question, because it depends on what you mean by false. I mean, people are motivated by all sorts of, people have all sorts of motivations that they don't necessarily understand. And sometimes they put forward one set of motivations as a mask for another set of motivations. I mean, one of the things I've been trying to unpack, for example, is there's a Marxist claim that the Marxist theory is predicated on care for either the working class or the oppressed, depending on whether it's classical Marxism or sort of identity politics Marxism. And I read a book by George Orwell called Road to Wigan Pier, where he questions that assumption. He said, as far as he was concerned, the English socialists that he met, and this was back in the 1930s and 40s, didn't so much like the poor as they hated the rich. Well, maybe that isn't true of everyone who wants to speak for the working class, but it's certainly true of a substantial number of them. Often you use an ideological mask to shield from yourself what your true motivations are. Say, well, you look at Marxism and you think, well, are the Marxists actually motivated by compassion and the desire to help the working class? Well, then you allow the Marxist ideas to unfold in society and you watch what happens. What happens is the working class gets slaughtered, and so does everyone else. And so then there's an indication that the stated motivations and the real motivations aren't the same. And that's a big problem. And you see, because we're polarizing in our society now, you see that sort of thing happening all the time. It's not easy to put your finger on what the actuality of the situation is. I think ideologies are like that often, is that they place a mask of virtue over a dark set of motivations. And I really do think that that's the case with it tends to be the case with extremist ideologies, period. You know, I'm standing for the nation, and so, but no, I really have a tremendous amount of hatred and I'm going to take it out on anyone who's foreign. You know, that's sort of typical of the Nazi type ultranationalists. And then on the left, it's like, well, I like the poor and the oppressed and I stand for them. It's like, well, no, you're just resentful and jealous and you don't believe that hard work matters because you don't work hard and you don't plan to. And so you can place a mask of virtue over your miserable, destructive resentment, and then you can tolerate looking at yourself in the mirror. And so, I mean, this is why I'm no fan of ideologies, generally speaking, because they have exactly that property. I don't know how we know, but I do know that we know. You know, like sometimes you say something and you're not sure whether it's true or not. It's a complicated question because you have limits on, your knowledge is in fact limited. So you're limited by your ignorance. And so you can never necessarily say that what you're saying is true, especially if you think of truth as a complete description of reality. It's like, well, then never anything you say is true because it's incomplete. But I don't think that that's in accordance with people's the actual experience of their reality. I think that you know perfectly well when you're lying, at least some of the time. And I think that manifests itself physiologically as much as any other way. You know, I've asked my classes, for example, many years in a row, because I think it's an interesting phenomenon. It's like, how many of you have had the experience of a little voice in your head talking to you, essentially, when you're about to do something that you know to be wrong, and everyone puts up their hand. Now, it isn't a voice for everyone, sometimes it's a feeling, but people have that capacity, right? What we think about that as conscience, whatever that is. It's a form of moral orientation, partly as a consequence of socialization. I think it's biologically instantiated because it seems so incredibly, well, people have been talking about it since the beginning of time. We better have a sense of when we're in alliance with the truth or when we're spouting falsehoods, because when you act out a falsehood, then something terrible happens. That's the definition of a falsehood, fundamentally. So it's based on a slightly different notion of what constitutes truth than one that's purely based on the idea of objective reality. It's based more on pragmatic reality, you know. So if you accept a set of propositions and you receive a psychophysiological signal that that's unreliable, that's an indication that if you act it out in the world, you're going to walk over a cliff and then you'll die, and that'll be the end of that. And so to think that we have no instinct, so to speak, to help us identify when that's the case is to say that thought is of no utility in relationship to survival. Well, I mean, you can say that if you want, but it's not a very credible argument. We're hardwired to be tempted to lie to ourselves, and the lies are very interesting. You know, I've studied that for a very long time, trying to figure out exactly that. Now, so imagine that your belief systems are essentially maps of the world. So they're maps that you use to orient yourself with, because we move from point to point, right? We're active creatures. And then those maps are very complexly structured. They're sort of hierarchically structured. And so, for example, you have some assumptions that are predicates of more of your actions than others. So, for example, here's a good way of thinking about it. Imagine that you're teaching your child to set the table, and they put the fork and the knife on the reverse sides of the plate. And you say, "You're a stupid kid. You've always been a stupid kid, and you're always going to be a stupid kid, and there's nothing that you can do to change that." Well, you might say, well, is the fact that the child made that small mistake an indication that he or she is that kind of stupid kid? And the answer to that is, well, it's some evidence. Now a sensible person would say, well, look, you got the knife and fork to the table, and you put it near the plate, so good for you, but you made this local mistake, this tiny local mistake. You just flipped these and you got it exactly right. Now, I think everybody who had any sense would realize that the second response is much more reasonable than the first. Now, the first response is one that knocks out the child's whole axiomatic system, right? You say, well, you're stupid, so you're bad. You've always been that way, so that covers your entire history. You can't learn, so you're destined for that in the future. It's like you've torn apart the orienting map that the child uses in the world. And it's a very important illustration, because if you have an argument with someone that you love, one of the appropriate tactics is to make the argument about the least that it has to be about, and to specify what you want as precisely as possible, because then you don't take the person apart. Now, there are times when we encounter pieces of information that threaten the integrity of our entire belief system. So another example would be, you have a relationship with someone, an intimate relationship, and it's predicated on the idea of fidelity. And so all of your memories of the relationship have that as an axiom for the representations. The way that you construe the present has that as an axiom, and the way that you construe the future has that as an axiom. And then you find out that the person has betrayed you, and perhaps multiple times. Well, your world falls apart. And the reason it falls apart is because that presupposition of fidelity is an axiom for every representation of that relationship you've made, and maybe of every representation of yourself you've made, and maybe of every representation of other people that you've made. And so it's a crucial card in the card house, right? You pull it out and everything falls. Okay, well, when people encounter information that is like that, they're likely to turn a blind eye to it. Well, and that often happens in the case of betrayal, because it's very rare, it happens sometimes, it's very rare that if someone in an intimate relationship betrays you, that you can't go back over the past and think, you know, there was a hint 2 years ago, there was another hint 18 months ago. We weren't holding hands as often, you know. He or she was always distracted. I knew, but I didn't ask any questions. It's willful blindness. Now, the ancient Egyptians, they represented the state as Osiris, and Osiris was willfully blind. That was one of the characteristics of the state, and it was because of that that his evil brother, Set, who's like a precursor to the idea of Satan, chopped him up and destroyed him. And so the lies that you're talking about are often sins of omission rather than sins of commission. It's like something threatens our axiomatic system at a very fundamental level. We get a physiological signal of threat. The physiological signal says, you should watch this and pay attention and unfold it and unpack it. And we think, no, we're not going there. And no wonder, because like you want your whole house of cards to collapse and you fall into chaos. It's a terrible thing. So that's why we're motivated to lie to ourselves. But it's not helpful. And the more you do it, the more likely a precipitous collapse is to occur, because you're not updating your world models. And actually the neuropsychology of that's reasonably well understood. A guy named Ramachandran, for example, has done some good work on that, and Alconen Goldberg as well. And but that's why, you know, it's very useful to know that our axiomatic systems orient us in the world and regulate our emotions. And so if you destabilize someone's fundamental axioms, you dysregulate their negative emotion. That's also why people fight so hard to protect not only their belief systems, but their social systems. So there's plenty of motivation to falsify, but it's a bad idea. You live out the falsifications, and the world hits you. People are motivated to do the least amount of damage to their cognitive structures possible to correct prediction errors. And it's for the reason that I just described, which is that, you know, that the deeper the axiom that you have to adjust, the more you lose of the map that orients you in the world, and then the more emotional dysregulation you experience. And that's no joke, like, you know, because people think of emotions in some sense as just subjective feelings, but they're not just that. They're psychophysiological reactions. And when it's like if say you're in a rough part of a city and you lose your map. It's like, well, you're going to be worried. And the reason you're worried is because something bad might happen to you. And so what your body does is ramp up into a state of emergency preparedness. And an emergency preparedness is a bunch of bad things might happen, and so I better be ready for any and all of them. And so it's very, very, very physiologically demanding. And you can handle that for short periods of time, but if you're in a state like that and it's chronic, well, that's stress, and that hurts you. You know, it hurts your brain. It destroys brain tissue. It suppresses immunological function. It enhances insulin production. It increases the probability that you'll be obese, that you'll develop cancer, that you'll develop heart disease, that you'll age. It's really no joke. And so when something axiomatically impossible happens, people are going to scramble to find reasons that don't require a retooling of their worldview. And it's no wonder, because they're avoiding, in archetypal terms, they're avoiding an involuntary descent to the underworld and even to hell. You know, like, for example, let's say that you're betrayed by your partner. You don't want to admit it. Well, no wonder, because all your memories of the past are wrong. Your view of your partner is incorrect, and so maybe your view of human beings and yourself is incorrect, and your future is like, well, hey, it isn't what you thought it was going to be, so God only knows what it is. But then, you know, when you dig into that, you might also find that there are reasons your partner was not faithful. Maybe you're a real son of a bitch, and you deserved everything you got. And so when you dig down and you have to restructure those axioms, not only do you have to encounter the unknown as such, which is no joke, but you may also have to discover your own malevolence. Well, it's no wonder people turn away from that. You know, like a a worldview adjustment is a major revolution, and it's
Thank you, Morgan.
And you may not recover from
Greatly
it. That's the
appreciate
other
it.
thing.
Unnecessary.
Broken,
Thank you. That's cool.
and you can be broken by betrayal. There's no reason to assume that you're going to pop out at the other end of that sadder but wiser. It just might do you in. It might kill you, or maybe you're chronically depressed, or maybe you're resentful and hostile and murderous. Or there's no reason to assume that you will recover. So it's no wonder people are afraid to do that. It's not surprising at all, and everyone is like that. So you struggle to find the least amount of repair you have to do to keep your pragmatic prediction system intact. Well, and often that means accusing someone else, because then they have to change and not you. And it means exaggerating one fact at the cost of another as you scramble to maintain your ground. I would say, I don't know if it's the media so much in the US as it is the Democratic Party. You know, the Democratic Party made some big mistakes in that election. They basically lost the election. It isn't so much that Trump won, although there's some of that, and in my view, definitely they lost. And I think they lost for a variety of reasons. There was probably a number of things that tipped the scales, because there wasn't much tipping that had to be done. But the fact that they decided to play identity politics was a big part of it. Now, what that means, perhaps, is that if the Democrats want to get back on track, they have to re-examine the axioms that led them to accept identity politics as an appropriate mode of being in the world. That's a big retooling, man. It may not even be possible. It may be that new Democrats have to emerge to replace the old ones, because the old ones are done. They can't learn. It's too late. We'll see. You know, there's a difference between wishing that people would live by truth and wishing that they wouldn't lie. You know, if you watch yourself through the day, there are things you don't know about, and then maybe you talk about them anyways, and hopefully that isn't what's happening right now. But you know now and then that you're saying something or acting in some manner that isn't in accordance with what you know to be true. Well, you cannot do that. Living in truth, that's a different issue, because, I mean, that requires, it may not be possible, it would require a superhuman effort to never utter a falsehood. And then maybe you can start seeing what the truth is, so to speak, but at least people cannot lie, not outright lie. And that's a good start. I mean, you see this, well, I've had some posters put up in my neighborhood recently, warning the community about me. So that's actually what they say, community warning, you know. And and I don't mind that people disagree with me. It's their fate. They'll act out their presuppositions and they'll find out what the consequences are. So fine. But there's a lie in the poster, you see. And so the lie is they put a picture of me up. And I look very aggressive. My mouth is open and I'm yelling. And I am actually yelling. But the reason I'm yelling is because I'm at a free speech rally that was shut down by radical leftists. And they took the mic and they shut down the PA system and they blasted white noise. And so the reason that I'm yelling and look aggressive is because I'm trying to make my voice heard over their noise. But that's the picture they picked to portray me. Well, they knew, or they were willfully blind, they knew that that was a trick. Now they feel that ends justify the means, I suppose. But they didn't have to do that. Like, they could have put up posters about me without lying. I think the posters would have even been more effective, because what's actually happened, I tweeted the posters, for example, is that, because they tell people to write the university and tell them what a reprehensible human being I am, and as far as I know, they've had the reverse effect. Many people have written the university and told them how reprehensible the poster producers are, and that, you know, that I'm not what they claim I am. Well, the lies didn't help them. They knew they were lying. They did it anyways. Well, when you do that, you corrupt the structure of the world, and you corrupt your own soul. And God help you. We're talking about whether there is such a thing as truth. Okay, so let's say that the role of a journalist, and I think journalists played this role quite nicely before, I think things started to go south in the 80s. But I think the journalists in the 70s and 60s and 50s and so on many of them were trying to lay out an unbiased simplification of the situation and to let the viewers, readers, make up their own minds, to the degree that that was possible. Like if you look at an old Time magazine, it's a completely different thing. From the 70s, they're like 100 pages thick. It's all text. It's dense. It's denser than today's Economist by a large margin. And, it's people grappling with ideas. Okay, so now that isn't how things work now in the let's say, in the mainstream media, to use a rather cliched phrase. Well, maybe they say, well, it doesn't matter. There's no such thing as truth anyways. It's like, yeah, it matters. Nobody under 30 listens to you. Why? Why is that? Why are they going to people like, well, Rogan's a good example, who has no production values and no real editing, and it's just like a rough conversation between two people. Why are they listening to that? Well, there's your evidence. Now, you don't have to pay any attention to it, and I don't really think that the classical media giants are paying attention. I think they're too old, actually. Like, I was looking, there was an MSNBC clip on YouTube about this robot that has embedded AI and some emotional responses. So I was kind of interested in that, so I went and watched it, and it was like a 4-minute clip. Only had like 12,000 views, which I found peculiar. But they put a 30-second ad at the beginning of it. And you couldn't skip it. Like, they don't know the conventions. It's like, first of all, an hour of content might justify a 15-second ad, and you get to skip it. It's like, you're going to ask me to pay for your 4 minutes of professionally edited fluff with 30 seconds of my time? That's not going to work. So they're often another world, and it isn't working out, and they're collapsing. And young people are turning in droves to these alternative media sources. And I think the reason for that is they're not getting an unbiased simplification from the media, which is what they should be getting. So, consequences. Falsehoods have consequences. That's what makes them false. And you can not believe that, it's fine. You can even get away with it for some period of time. But for very long. People don't trust editing anymore. They don't know what's going on behind the scenes. So, and if your content isn't to overcome your technical inadequacy, and that's so interesting. It's also because, media savvy young people, if they've clipped together a video, they can do a pretty damn good job of hitting near CNN quality with their editing, especially if they're smart. And so they're just not impressed by that. It's no longer a signal of competence, that. And in fact, it's become a signal of things going on behind the scenes that you don't understand. Commercial interests, ideological interests, corporate interests, whatever. But not your interests, that's for sure. Well, if it's news, it's kind of like, that question is sort of like the question, what constitutes information? Well, if something's
All right, hello everybody. We're gonna drop into a different piece here. We're just gonna say hello to Brent on his birthday. That's what we're trying to do here. We have Brent, I believe, on the line. Hey Brent, do you hear me?
I hope everyone's doing okay. Just having just pour myself a drink here a few minutes ago.
It's your birthday, right, Brent? Can you hear me?
A nice little drink.
I don't think you can hear me now.
And I picked up a cooler earlier today. Probably starting on that in a little bit. Probably this evening, I guess.
Right on. Cool, man. Well, happy birthday,
other
Brent.
than that, I haven't been doing much today. Just relaxing, enjoying the show.
Yeah, no, cool. Can you hear me? I don't think you can. So we're going to flip back to what we were watching, and happy birthday, though, brother. Right back to the show.
49. I am
49 today? Happy birthday, man. You've got a little bit of time on me. So we're going to just jump back to the show.
Formative, well, it informs you, and what that means is it brings you into alignment better. There should be an alignment between you and the world. If you're properly informed, you're in a formation, right? And a formation is ordered and sequential. And you think, well, what does that mean? Well, if you and I might ask you for directions, and you inform me about where I'm going, and then I follow your directions and I get there. It's like, so I'm in alignment with the world all of a sudden because you've informed me. Well, if it's real news, it informs you, and what that means is it updates your map. You know, it takes something that's, you have a journey that you're on, and it isn't fully mapped out because what the hell do you know? And then someone tells you some news and you think, oh, I have to make a slight detour here. I have to change the way I'm looking at the landscape slightly. That's news. Now you might ask, well, is much of what is news actually information? And the answer I have to that is no, hardly any of it. I haven't watched television news for 30 years, I would say, because I think, well, if it's only relevant today, it's not relevant. I don't want to know what's only relevant today. Why the hell would I pay any attention to that? So, you know, I've subscribed to The Economist for quite a long time, although I haven't renewed it recently for a variety of reasons. But at least they're talking about things that are going to be relevant conceivably over a month or a couple of months period. And I believe they were reasonably unbiased, although I'm not so sure about that anymore. I think the quality of that magazine is actually dropped. News updates your map, and then you don't fall into a hole and get eaten by a crocodile. And that's what information is essentially too, is that it updates the manner in which you orient yourself in the world. So that's partly your perceptions and partly your actions. And you'll pay for that, right? Because it's cheaper to pay for it than it is to learn it through experience. So I guess that's what news is. News is something that it's cheaper to learn than it is to learn by paying for it than it is to learn through experience. And most of it's not news. I scan a lot of different sources. You know, I do look at newspapers a bit. I read a lot online, but I spend most of my time reading books, I read books mostly. That's where I get my news, you know, and you might say, well, that's not the cutting edge dynamic news, and it's not. And I follow Twitter and I look online and I still glance at the major news front pages now and then. I like the BBC so far. But mostly I'm trying to concentrate on things that have a longer shelf life. Well, status is really important to people. I mean, although I would say I've had to think through my terminology with regards to that for a long time. Now, I mean, people exist in hierarchies like most animals, right? Even very ancient animals live in hierarchies. It's not something human beings created. The patriarchy is not a human creation. It's way older than human beings. It's 1/3 of a billion years old. So, and you have a counter in your brain that tells you where you are in the hierarchy. And the higher you are in the hierarchy, the more serotonin your brain produces and the more your negative emotions are regulated. So what that means is that for every unit of uncertainty you encounter, you produce fewer units of emergency preparedness. It's a big deal, you know, because if you're at the top of let's call it a hierarchy for now, you're pretty secure. You got a lot of allies, right? You got a lot of influence. You've got a lot of wealth. You've got a good place to live. And so if something creeps into your life that's not so good, you don't have to panic about it. You've got options. Whereas if you're at the bottom of the hierarchy, you're barely clinging to the side of the window, you know, with your fingernails. Something that moves one finger might send you plummeting to your death, so you're in a constant state of hyperanxiety. People really care about where they are in the hierarchy, because that old counter, which is 1/3 of a billion years old, tells them how upset to get about uncertainty as a consequence of their placement in the hierarchy. Now, the postmodernists would say, well, all those hierarchies are predicated on power, which is to say they're all tyrannies, and that's actually untrue. Not in functional societies, and our society is functional. And you might say, well, how do you know that? And I would say, because the electricity is on. You know, I mean, this incredible infrastructure we have works almost all the time, almost for everyone. And so that means the hierarchy isn't a hierarchy of power and tyranny, it's a hierarchy of competence. And so there's no reason to be cynical about that. Now you might say, well, it gets polluted with power and it gets polluted with tyranny. It's like, yeah, it's not perfect. You know, and tyrants emerge and psychopaths emerge, and you know, and not everyone is equally well served by the system, obviously. But compared to any other system that's ever been, or anyone that exists currently, well, all you have to do is look around. And all these people complaining about the tyranny of the system communicate with their iPhones and their Androids and never think for a second that the only reason those things work is because we live in hierarchies of competence, not hierarchies of power. So status is important, but it's not based on, in a functioning society, it's not based on power. You know, even Frans de Waal, who's a primatologist, has showed quite clearly that even among chimpanzees, they're pretty damn brutal. Tyrannical chimpanzee hierarchies are unstable. So what happens is you get a big ugly chimp who's like all muscle and irritability. He climbs the dominance hierarchy because he pounds everyone flat. It's like, yeah, he has a bad day though. And then two of the chimpanzees that he brutalized gang up and tear him to shreds. So what de Waal has found among the chimps is that the stable hierarchies are run by males, because chimps are patriarchal in their structure essentially, but the chimps that stay at the top and produce a stable hierarchy are ones that groom other chimps and have friends and engage in mutual reciprocity and pay positive attention to the females and also to the infants. So the tyrant chimp just doesn't last. It's even true for chimps. Well, so the idea that this is the big leftist idea, all the hierarchies are corrupt, they only serve those who are at the top, it's all power. It's like, no, that's wrong. And the proof is the fact that the hierarchy functions. Well, the prestige of the classic media was predicated on their influence. And so let's say that the New York Times is an influential and prestigious outlet. Okay, why? Well, here's an example. You write a book, it hits the New York Times bestseller list. Well, who cares? Well, the reason you care is because if you hit the list, your book sales exponentially increase. And so the prestige is related to the power of the institution to change perception and behavior. Well, so it's the brand, you could say. So the brand is the marker of that prestige that's been stored up across time. Yeah, but the thing is that the older media forms are raping their brands, right? They have value because they were prestigious, because they did change people's opinions and behavior, but that's evaporating. And it's partly evaporating because, well, there are new media forms, and it's partly evaporating because people no longer really trust them to give them that unbiased simplification. And so, and the thing about the egalitarianism of YouTube is that it's got its pros and its cons. And then this is the same with the web in general, is that the signal to noise ratio, there's a lot of noise. There's a lot of noise. And that's what happens under extraordinarily egalitarian circumstances, is there might be a lot of signal, but it's damn hard to find it because you don't have qualified gatekeepers. Now that's changing because even though YouTube is egalitarian, there's a vicious hierarchy that's already developed. Like almost everyone on YouTube has no subscribers, right? 1,000, 100, something like that. A tiny proportion has 100,000. An even tinier fraction has 500,000, and then above 1 million, it's like vanishingly small. So the hierarchy emerges, and I would say it's a hierarchy of competence almost by definition. Let's say we don't know what YouTube does, but whatever it does, the people who have 4 million subscribers are doing best. So it's a hierarchy of competence right away. Well, like everything to some degree is a social construct. Like the problem with those sorts of phrases is that they're used as one phenomena causes for everything. That's how you can tell if you're talking to someone who's an ideologue. It's like, well, why is that happening? Well, it's the patriarchy. It's like, oh, I see, it's happening because of society. Well, yeah, of course. You could even say that you die because of the inadequacy of the patriarchy. If it just got its act together, it could figure out how to make you immortal. Well, fair enough. That's true, although it's not true in any useful sense. It's like, is it a social construct? You got to be way more specific than that before a comment like that has any utility whatsoever. You got to delve into the details, and you also have to define what you mean. To some degree, because we're social animals, there isn't anything that we do that society has no influence on. But that doesn't mean that everything is a social construct. It's muddy thinking. I don't think it will. I think it's done. Marshall McLuhan, and his famous, I don't remember what he said exactly. The medium is the message. There we go. That's it. What did he mean by that? New technological forms require new forms of perception and behavior. And I used the MSNBC example earlier to show that they don't know the idiom, right? They think, well, YouTube, low production values, cute cat videos. There's no idiom. It's like there is an idiom. There's conventions. They don't know them. They can't make the translation. They don't know how. And so I don't think they're going to survive. I don't see any evidence that they are, because I don't see any evidence that people under 30 care anything about, or even know to some degree, about the old school media organizations. That's not where they live. Now, I don't know if where they live is any better. It's different though, that's for sure. And it's not obvious. Like, I don't think very many horse and buggy makers turned into auto manufacturers. I assume some did, but my guess is the vast majority of them couldn't make the adjustment because they thought of the car as a horseless carriage. Well, that's not what it was. We don't even know what it was, but it wasn't a horseless carriage, that's for sure. So, and YouTube isn't TV by a different form. First of all, it's permanent. That's weird. And unbelievably powerful, because it also means that for the first time in human history, the spoken word or the received image has as much permanence as a book. But it's way faster to market. Way more people attend to it. Like, I can put up a YouTube video that I make in a day and it'll have 150,000 views in a week. I can't do that with a book. That would take me 3 years, and probably it wouldn't happen. I probably wouldn't sell 150,000 copies. So it's a whole new thing. And God only knows how powerful it is. We have no idea. It's a Gutenberg revolution for the spoken word. It's a different thing, that's right. It's a different landscape. The rules that work for television don't work for YouTube, because YouTube isn't television. Now, that doesn't mean I know what it is, but it likes things rougher. That's, you can observe it to some degree. It doesn't like editing very much. It wants to see the mistakes. It wants to see the warts. It trusts it then. It doesn't want everything airbrushed and edited out. It doesn't care as much about attractiveness. It isn't like all the YouTube people who have become influential the good-looking news anchors that you see on CNN. In fact, I think that's also something that people have come to distrust. So, but you just can't make the lateral move from an old media to a new media, especially if you have contempt for the new media, which is a big mistake. It means you don't know anything about it. So you're shunted off into irrelevancy before you realize it. And so, you know, maybe the same thing will happen to YouTube too in 5 years, because a new technology will come out. That could easily happen. So. I would say no. I don't think so, but I think maybe that would be the case if they knew the context, you know. But I think it's very easy, and it's been something I've been absolutely horrified about for the entire last year, is like, it's certainly possible that I've said something in the 260 videos that are online, most of my previous courses, that if taken out of context would sink me, right? That hasn't happened, and thank God for that. You know, it means I've either been very fortunate or I've been very careful about what I've been saying, and I would say both of those are true. It's certainly possible that I'll say something tomorrow and be done. That's the most likely. I've felt that way the whole year. The most likely outcome for me was that I would say something that would sink me, and all the context in the world wouldn't matter. So I think I'm more protected than that now, I would say, because I've been attacked a lot. And, you know, it's the crying wolf phenomena. If you hear 100 attacks on someone and they all turn out to not be true, you're probably less likely to believe the 101st. But like, I have this talk coming up on November 11th, which I'm actually very worried about, because I know that the protesters who will be there in force have been emboldened by the fact that they got the same talk canceled by Ryerson University about 3 months ago. And I'm quite nervous about the possibility that someone who's hypothetically...
Hey gang, so we're gonna drop back from that. Maybe we'll show other parts of that. I see that people are kind of tailing off watching. And so we're going to re-show the piece that we showed at the beginning, which I do think it's important, just to show Canadians, like, this stuff did go down, history repeats itself, like, there is nepotism in our government, and, well...
Hey there.
In Western Canada, the middle finger.
Okay, first question, what's my favorite spot in Canada? Salmon Arm, BC. My father had an approach to politics that not everyone agreed with. And no matter how nice and good and smart any politician is, there's always going to be people who disagree with some of the decisions. Because really, in politics, you do have to make big decisions, and whenever you make big decisions, there's going to be people who agree with it and people who don't disagree with it. And some of the decisions my father made, there were a number of people who disagreed with quite intensely, and they didn't always get along the best way. But he always thought about what was right for Canada and worked very, very hard to try and build a better country for everyone within it. That didn't work for everyone. Not everyone was happy with that, but he made a mark on this country that shapes us to this day, and it's because of him that this school has a big, successful immersion program. I mean, these are things that made a big difference right across the country, and we should be very proud of that. Similarly, I'm going to make decisions, and I have made decisions that some people like and some people don't like, and ultimately what you have to be confident about is you have to know in your heart and in your brain that the decisions you're making are the right ones, that you've listened to the people who want you to do this, you've listened to the people who don't want you to do this, and you've made a decision in what is the best interest for Canadians now and in the future, and that's what I stay focused on.
All right, guys, so we're going to wrap it up on that. So it's been a really fun week. It's our second week after 1 week of question periods. It's just funny because the channel's name is Question Period Canada, and we have not been able to cover that. Anyhow, we've been filling the time and hopefully keeping you entertained. We've got lots of videos and an interesting perspective, and we're getting better at finding things to show that we can show, like in a live go. So that's so much fun. The crowd is amazing. I'm not going to lie. When, like, as soon as I shut this down, when I hit that button when I click that one on the mouse, I'm going to be immediately looking forward to the next show we do, which is not going to be until Monday. And I don't mean to blow this stuff up too much, but my show on Monday will be like nothing that you've ever seen. For a live broadcast of Question Period, there's going to be no second place, guys. Out of the water, I know that I'm overcommitting. Yup, God, yes I am. And we're going to hit home run on Monday. I just hope you are there. If not, make sure you're there, because like Wednesday is always the wild day, like in Parliament. And on Wednesday, we'll have some of the things that we try on Monday tweaked. Just saying, it's going to be a big week for live broadcasting. Like, I'm so excited personally because there's levels to this stuff, and we're going to like level up. I know next on Monday. Wait and see. That's it. Ehren, Question Period Canada. Thank you all for hanging out. It was really fun. Brent, thank you for dropping in. Happy birthday, bro. And to all the new people that came to the channel today, that's awesome. Come back. That's it. Like, this is the experience. We're learning about Canadian politics. We are a little bit sided. Like, we know we need change. What is that going to be? What does that entail? We're working on those details. Like, we're figuring that out. That's it. Ehren, Question Period Canada. Thank you all so much for watching. Sheila, you're the bomb. And I've got a bunch of other people that support me on here. Thank you all. It's awesome to see you guys every day. I can't wait. I'm going to hit this mouse button and shut this off. But then immediately be like waiting for the next, which is going to be Monday. I'm not doing this weekend. Maybe I'll do some, not doing the weekend. We'll be back on Monday. Can't not wait. Question Period Canada on Monday is going to be fire, guys. Fire. That's all I can say. Can't oversell it more than that. We're out.